Frances Ardley is 71, 3 weeks out of hospital after a knee replacement, and a retired county records clerk. She comes home to find her son has changed the locks. I'm Mary. I write these stories for you. I read every comment you leave on them, and I would like to know whether you would have let them finish. This one is called The New Locks. Here is Frances in her own words. My key went in about a third of the way and stopped. I tried it twice more, gently, the way you do when you think the trouble is you. Then I stood on my own front step with a rehab discharge folder under my arm and a cane I had been told to use for another 4 weeks, and I looked at a brass deadbolt that was 2 shades brighter than the one I had lived with since 1994. The door opened from the inside. My daughter-in-law had a dish towel over her shoulder. She looked at the cane first, the way people do, and then she said, "Frances, we changed it for your safety. You are not living here alone again." My name is Frances Ardley. That was the 11th of October, 20 past 2 in the afternoon, and I had known about the lock for 9 days. What Kendra did not know, and what my son did not know either, was that I had spent 29 years of my working life at a counter in the Licking County Recorder's Office in Newark, Ohio, and that the first thing I ever learned there was that a house does not belong to whoever is standing in the doorway of it. 23 days out of that knee, 3 of those weeks in a rehabilitation facility on Cherry Valley Road, with a woman named Consuela, who was the only person in the building who ever asked me what I did before I retired. I told her what I used to do. She said that was the saddest hobby she had ever heard of. I said she should try it once and see. Marvin used to laugh at it too. Marvin was my husband, a lineman for the electric co-op for 31 years, and when he died in the winter of 2016, he left me a paid-off house on Buena Vista Street, and one piece of advice I did not appreciate at the time, which was, "Franny, do not leave anything to the imagination of your children." So in March of 2017, I did what I had watched hundreds of people fail to do. I sat down with an attorney named Ida Whitcomb, who I knew from the courthouse because she had been coming to my counter for title searches since the Reagan administration, and I moved my house into the Ardley Family Trust. Ida walked me through it at her kitchen table on a Saturday because her office was being painted. I am the trustee. The house is mine to live in until I die. My son Ross gets every board of it after that, without a probate judge, without a lawyer taking a slice, without anybody arguing at a funeral. There was one more line to fill in, near the end, and Ida had to ask me twice. I gave her an answer that surprised her enough that she put her pen down and said, "Frances, most people say their child." I said, "I know. Remember that. It does not matter for another 7 years." Then I recorded it. Volume, page, and date. In a book anybody in Ohio may walk in and read for free between 8 and 4:30. This is the part where people expect me to say I hid it. I did not hide anything, and that is the whole joke of it. He never asked. And in fairness to him, and I am going to be fair to him whether he deserves it or not, I never volunteered it either. Here is why. I stood at that counter and watched what a name on a piece of paper does to a family. I watched a man in a good coat find out that his stepmother had been on the deed since 1981. I watched 2 sisters from Heath find out at my counter, in front of me, which of them their mother had left the farm to. You hand a photocopy across a laminate counter and you watch a face change, and I never got used to it. So I made a rule, standing at that counter in about 1996. When it was my turn, nobody in my family was going to find out what they were getting from a stranger and a copy machine. I always meant to tell Ross over a Sunday dinner. I had 7 years of Sunday dinners in which to do it, and the reason I never did is not noble at all. It is that Kendra was always there. The knee was scheduled for the 18th of September. Ross drove me to the hospital in Zanesville at 5 in the morning with a thermos of coffee he had made himself, which he does not do, and he sat in the waiting room the entire time, which the nurse told me afterward, and which he never mentioned. I want that on the record before I tell you the rest. My son is not a monster. My son is a 46-year-old man who has never once in his life been the loudest person in his own kitchen. Kendra is 44. She manages the front office of a dental group in Granville, and she is very good at it, and I mean that. She is organized in a way that I recognize, because I was organized in that way. She keeps a running list. She does not forget. Her brother Doyle sells real estate. I did not think anything of that fact for 9 years. I have thought about very little else since. The plan, as it was explained to me from a hospital bed while I was on a nerve block and could not feel my right leg, was that Ross and Kendra would stay at the house on Buena Vista Street while I was in rehab. Somebody had to bring in the mail. Somebody had to run the water so the traps did not dry out. Kendra said the word temporarily 4 times in about 90 seconds, which I noticed, because at the counter you learn that people repeat the word that is doing the most work. I said yes. I gave my son my house keys in a hospital gown with my leg packed in ice, and I was glad somebody wanted to help. The first 11 days were nothing. Ross came on Tuesdays and Fridays with a magazine and a hot pretzel from the stand outside the Newark bus stop, which is a thing he has brought me since he was in high school and which he has never once got right, because I do not like mustard and he has never learned that. Then Dell Prather called me. Dell is 78, he lives across Buena Vista Street from me, and he walks a beagle named Chief past my front porch at 7:40 every morning of his life, and has done since before Marvin died. He does not use the telephone. His wife used the telephone. His wife died in 2020, so when the desk phone in my rehab room rang on the 2nd of October, and it was Dell Prather, I understood before he said anything that something was wrong at my house. He said, "Franny, I don't want to be an old woman about this." Then he told me there had been a truck in my driveway on Monday from a company called Vollmer and Sons, that 2 men had gone in and out for about 3 hours, and that when he had walked Chief past the Tuesday before, there was a Rubbermaid bin on my porch with my winter coats in it, sitting out in the weather. And then he said the thing that made me sit up. He said, "They put a new lock on your front door. I watched him do it. Your boy held the drill." I did not cry. I have been asked that, and I did not. And I am not going to pretend to a feeling I did not have. What I felt at 9 in the morning on the 2nd of October, sitting on a hospital bed in a facility on Cherry Valley Road, was something closer to what I used to feel at the counter when a document came across it wrong. Consuela was changing the water pitcher when the call ended. She has 3 children and a mother in Toledo, and she works 2 jobs. And she looked at my face and did not ask what was wrong, which I appreciated more than I can tell you. She said, "You want me to shut the door?" I said yes. Then I sat in a rented bed with my leg on a foam wedge and worked out what I actually had. 9 days until they sent me home. A son who came twice a week, a neighbor with a beagle and a landline, and a document sitting in a book 4 miles away that I had signed the spring after Marvin died and never mentioned to a living soul except the woman who drew it up. I sat on what Dell told me for 9 days, and I want you to have all 9, because that is where this was one, and there is not one raised voice in any of them. The first thing I did was nothing. That is a skill. I did not pick up the phone to either of them. I ate a lunch of chicken and rice with the woman in the next bed, and I did my afternoon therapy, and I let Monday be Monday. The second thing I did was ask a question I already knew the answer to. Ross came on the Friday with the pretzel. I said, "How is the house?" And my son, who I taught to tie his shoes, said, "It's fine, Mom, quiet." I said, "Is the mail piling up?" He said, "Kendra's on it." I said, "Any trouble with the doors? That front deadbolt sticks in the cold." And there it was. He looked at the window, 46 years old, a grown man with gray, coming in at the temples, and he looked at the window and said, "I don't think so." That was the moment, not the lock, not the coats, not the truck. My son sat 6 feet from me in a vinyl chair, and chose the easier sentence, and I felt something in my chest go quiet and level, the way a scale does when it finally settles on a number. I have thought about that afternoon more than I have thought about anything else in this story, and I still do not know whether he was protecting her or protecting himself. And I have decided it does not matter, because from where I was sitting, they look identical. The third thing I did was go to work. Consuela wheeled me down to the family lounge on the Saturday, where there is a computer that the residents may use for what the sign calls personal correspondence. Licking County has its records online now. I helped test that system in 2009. I pulled up my own parcel, and there it was, exactly where I had put it in March of 2017, in the name of the Ardley Family Trust, dated, recorded, indexed, and open to the public. Untouched. Nobody had even tried, which told me nobody had thought to look. Dell called again on the Wednesday. He had bought a phone card at the Kroger for the purpose, which I did not find out until Christmas, and which I have not been able to think about since without needing a minute. He said a truck had come Monday afternoon, and 2 men had carried my mother's china cabinet out through the front door and into the garage, on its side, under a moving blanket. That cabinet is walnut. It came from a farmhouse in Perry County, and it has stood upright in a dining room since 1931. Then he said there had been a woman there that same morning with a clipboard and a phone on a little tripod, going room to room. She was not there long. She parked in the street and not the driveway, and she left the front door propped open the whole time, which is how Dell could see her at all. Nobody sets a phone on a tripod in an emptied dining room except to photograph it for a listing. That is when I stopped thinking of this as something my son had let happen and started thinking of it as something with a schedule. Then I went looking for the money, which is what took 9 days instead of 9 minutes, and it is where this stops being a story about a lock. Vollmer and Sons is a real company in Hebron, Ohio, and Deke Vollmer has been doing kitchens in this county for 25 years. I called him from the family lounge on the Thursday. I did not accuse him of anything, because he had not done anything. I said I was Francis Ardley of Buena Vista Street and that I was in rehab and had not seen the scope of work, and could he email it to me. There was a pause on that line I would like to have on a recording. He said, "You're the mother." I said I was. He said, "Ma'am, I've been standing in your dining room." I told him I knew that. I told him I was not calling to shout at him, that I was 71 and in a facility with a bad knee and a telephone and not much else, and that all I wanted was the piece of paper his estimator had written. He sent it inside the hour. Contractors are frightened of exactly one thing, and it is not lawyers. It is not being paid. The scope of work ran to 2 pages, and I read it standing up. Remove the wall between the kitchen and the dining room. Cap and reroute the gas line. New island with a farmhouse sink. Refinish the floors throughout, which meant the oak Marvin and I paid for in 1998. 1 room a year, out of his overtime. I had to sit down for that line. $46,300, plus permits. It was addressed to Kendra Ardley. The line marked, owner said Ross Ardley. And at the top of the second page, the estimator had typed a note to himself. On market by spring, per client. I have kept a copy of that page ever since. They were not watching my house. They were staging it. I read that email 11 times on a public computer in a rehab facility. What I did next is the whole difference between this story and the ones that end badly. I did not call my son. I called Ida Whitcomb. Ida has never in her life raised her voice at anybody. She is the only lawyer I have ever met who lets a silence finish. I told her everything in about 9 minutes. She asked me 3 questions. Was I still the sole trustee? Had I signed anything at all since the 18th of September, including anything anybody described as insurance paperwork? And did my son and his wife have my permission to be in the house? I said yes, no, and yes. And Ida said, "Good, then this is much smaller than it feels." Then she told me I had been asking the wrong question for 9 days. I kept asking how they thought they could sell a house that was not theirs. Ida said nobody renovates a kitchen to steal a house. You renovate a kitchen to sell it later, for more, and legally. I said, then what were they doing? She said, building a reason. And I want to be honest with you, Francis. This next part is me guessing, and I have guessed wrong before. Look at what they actually did. They put you somewhere with a rail. They took your table out. If you come home to a house you cannot manage, and there is a family who have quietly been keeping track of how you are doing, then a year or two from now somebody says the word guardianship in a doctor's office, and nobody in that room hears theft. They hear a daughter-in-law who has been carrying this alone. I said, and then whoever a court puts in charge can sell it. Ida said, yes, but I could be wrong. People do stupid short things for money all the time without a plan behind them. I did not believe her about the year or two. I thought it was a lawyer building a worst case out of a lock and a wall. It took my daughter-in-law about 10 days to prove me wrong in my own kitchen, and I will get to that. I said, and every family in my position assumes that is the son. And she said, Francis, do you remember what we did about that? I told her I remembered exactly what we did about that. Then I asked her not to say it to me over a telephone. I asked her to say it in my kitchen, in front of both of them, because a Beagle owner and a contractor and a public computer had all told me what was happening in my own house, and the two people doing it had not. Then she told me the awkward half. I had let them in. She said, Francis, they are not burglars and they are not tenants. They are family you gave a key to, and that lasts exactly as long as you say it does. If you want them out, you have to take the permission back on paper, with a date on it, or you are the one in the wrong. Ida said, Francis, you can do this 2 ways. I can send a letter tomorrow, and they will be out before you come home, and you will never hear the whole of it. Or you can come home on the 11th and let them tell you themselves, and I will be 4 houses down in my car. I want you to know I thought about it for a full day. I chose the second one, and I did not choose it out of drama. I chose it because I had spent 9 days being told by a phone call and an email and a public record what my family was doing, and not one word of it had come from either of their mouths. After 46 years of being that boy's mother, I was owed 1 sentence in person. I got it at 2:20 on the 11th of October, on my own front step, and you have already heard exactly what it was. Here is what the house looked like from the doorway. The dining room wall was open from the tape line up. Studs, wiring, a sheet of plastic hanging where my mother's hutch had stood since I was a bride. My table was gone. My mother's china cabinet was against the front window with a bedsheet over it. The oak floors had been sanded in the front room, which meant it was already too late for those. And there was that smell that sanded old oak has, which is a sweet smell, and which I had last smelled in 1998 when Marvin did the back bedroom himself over one weekend and could not stand up straight for 4 days afterward. My coats were still on the porch in the Rubbermaid bin. 2 weeks of weather. And on the counter, squared up under a pen, was my mail. Not all of it. 6 pieces, opened, in a stack, the way you present something rather than the way you set something down. 2 of them were from my insurance company. One was a change of policy form with a yellow tab on it and a line highlighted where Ross was to be added to the homeowner's policy on my house as an additional insured party. Kendra had brought me mail twice in 3 weeks. She had brought me a birthday card from my cousin and a coupon book. She had not brought me that. On the telephone, Ida had asked me that odd, narrow question about insurance paperwork, and I had said no, and at the time I did not understand why she shaped it that way. Standing in my own kitchen looking at a yellow tab, I understood it fine. I stood there long enough that my knee started to complain about it. That form would not have given my son 1 inch of my house. What it would have given him is his name and my address printed on the same line, dated, on a company's letterhead. If you are ever going to stand in a room and explain how long you have been taking care of your mother, that is the kind of paper you want in your hand. I said, "Where is my table?" Kendra said, "The garage." And then she said, and I want to be exact about this, because she was not shouting and she was not sneering. She said it the way you tell somebody the weather. "Francis, we should have had this conversation before your surgery. That knee is not going to be the last thing. This house has stairs, it has a tub you have to step over, and it has 40 years of stuff in it. Ross and I have been talking about it for a year." A year. And Ross said, from behind her, "Mom, sit down. You shouldn't be standing." 46 years old, and in the middle of taking my house, he was worried about my leg. I have never known what to do with that, and I still do not. I sat down, not because he told me to, because I had been standing on a cane for 6 minutes and I wanted my hands free. Then I asked the question I had come home to ask, and I asked it flat. "Who told you the house was yours?" Kendra said, "Nobody said it was ours." I said, "The estimate says owner Ross Ardley." And her face did the thing. Not guilt, recalculation. She said, "That is just how contractors fill out a form." I said, "It says the client wants it listed by spring." The room got very still. Ross said, "Mom, where did you get that?" I said, "Deke Vollmer emailed it to me. I asked him for it." He thought I knew. And here is where I found out that people who plan things this carefully have usually only planned the first half. Kendra sat down across from me on the arm of my own sofa, and she stopped managing, and what came out was almost a relief to hear, because it was finally true. She said Doyle had run the numbers in June, on a napkin, at a cookout. The house lists at $290 as it stands. Open the wall, do the floors, and it goes $310 in a spring market. Take out the $46 for the work and the commission, and the rest of it, and you clear about $240. Then she said the part I have never repeated to anybody until now. She said a one-level unit off Mount Vernon Road, 2 bedrooms, no stairs, no tub to step over, runs about $90. $240 for my house. $90 for a 2-bedroom with no stairs. $150 left over for the people who arranged it. She had not been planning to rob me. In her own mind, she was buying me out, at a price she considered fair, from a life she had already decided was over. There was a difference in there somewhere, and I have never once been able to find it in mine. I said, "And Doyle never thought to look up who owns it." She said, "Why would he? It was a cookout." That is the whole thing, in one sentence, from the person who did it. Nobody in my family ever looked, because looking would have meant admitting they were already spending it. She said, "Your son has been covering $340 a month of your homeowners and your taxes for over 2 years, and you have never noticed. Did you know that? Because you never look. And now there is a knee, and after the knee there is a hip, and I have watched exactly this in my own family, and somebody in this house has to be practical." I said, "That is a lot of true things arranged to make one false one look reasonable." She said, "You were never coming back here alone anyway." I have been turning that sentence over for 10 months. It is the most honest thing anybody managed all afternoon, because it is not about the money at all. It is a person telling me that my life had already been decided in another kitchen, and that the only thing left to negotiate was how much it was worth on the way out. I turned to my son. "Ross, whose name is on the deed?" He said, "Mom, come on." I said, "It is not a trick question. You have been in this house for 3 weeks. Have you looked?" And Ross Ardley, who learned to read a road map in the front seat of my Buick, said, "It's your house, Mom." I said, "Not yours." "Not mine either, not the way you mean it. Since March of 2017, this house has belonged to the Ardley Family Trust. I run that trust, I live here until I die, and you are the person it all goes to after that. You have driven past the building that says so 100 times. Nobody said anything. I had my hand in my cardigan pocket the whole time, on my phone, and Ida had told me in the car park that morning that she did not want a call. She wanted one word. I had sent it while Kendra was still explaining Doyle's napkin. Into that quiet, I heard a car door. Ida Whitcomb came up my front walk in a raincoat carrying a soft folder, and she rang my own doorbell because she is a person of manners, and Kendra opened the door to her because Kendra did not know what else to do. There were 3 pieces of paper in that folder. The first was a certified copy of the recorded deed, with the county's stamp on it and the volume and page in the corner, which Ida put on my kitchen counter and did not read aloud, because it does not need reading aloud. Ross picked it up. I watched my son read the name of a trust he inherits and understand, in about 4 seconds, that everything he had allowed under that roof for 3 weeks had been built on top of a document he never once went looking for. He read it twice. Then he asked the wrong question, which is how I know he was telling the truth, because a man who had planned this would have asked a better one. He said, "Does this mean I don't get the house?" Ida said, "Sir, all of it comes to you. What you do not get is a turn at the wheel while she is alive." Kendra said it before she could stop herself, and it is how I know Ida had been right about every word. She said, "And if she cannot manage it herself, God forbid if it came to that." Ida said, "Then it comes to me." Kendra said, "To you." Ida said, "Frances named a successor trustee in March of 2017, and it is not her son. If she is ever unable to manage her own affairs, this house does not pass to whoever is standing closest to her. It passes to me, and I would not sell it, because she has told me in writing that she wants to die in it." That is the thing a trust does that a deed in your own name does not. Nothing was hidden. What was already settled, 7 years before anybody picked up a drill, was who takes over if I no longer can. I have thought a great deal about the 4 seconds after that. Kendra did not look at me, and she did not look at Ida. She looked at the open dining room wall, at the studs and the plastic sheeting, at $46,000 of somebody else's spring listing, and I watched a very organized woman run her numbers one more time and come out somewhere she had not planned for. Ross set the deed down on my counter very carefully. Too carefully, the way a man handles something he has just found out he was holding wrong. The second was a letter, dated that morning, signed by me, ending their permission to occupy the property, effective in 30 days. Ida had explained that number to me twice. 30 days is not generosity, and it is not weakness. It is the difference between a woman asking her family to leave and a woman handing her family a reason to say she threw them out in the cold. The third was 1 page, and it was the one that changed the room. It was 1 page to Vollmer and Sons, copied to the county building department. The property is held in trust. The trustee has not authorized this work. No owner has applied for a permit. Nothing claimed against this house, for it will stick. I said, "Kendra, the insurance form on my counter. Did you call them or did Ross?" She said, "I did." She said it without a flicker, and I believe it was the only completely true sentence she gave me all afternoon. Then she said, "You are going to ruin Doyle." Ida said, "Ma'am, I have written a letter about a wall. Nobody has ever spoken to my daughter-in-law like that in her life. She had nothing for it. That is the thing about the quiet ones, and I say this as one of them. We are not clever. We are just already finished when everybody else is still talking." I want to tell you what happened after, because I promised you that this ends, and I do not believe in stories that trail off. They were out in 19 days, not 30. Ross moved a mattress into the second bedroom of an apartment on Union Street in Newark. Kendra went to her mother's in Granville for the winter. I did not ask what happened between them, and they have not told me. and I have arrived at an age where I do not require every answer to be delivered to me. Deke Vollmer called me himself the day after Ida's letter. He was not angry with me. He was angry at his own office. 3 hours of demolition in a house on the word of a man who was not on the county record, and his own contract says his estimator checks that. He also told me, because I asked him straight out, that the deposit had come off Kendra's own card in September, $4,600, and that she had called twice in October asking for it back. She did not get it back. He came in November with 2 of his boys and put my dining room wall up again for the price of the lumber, and would not take a cent for the labor. He said, "Mrs. Ardley, I have a mother." Then he refinished the rest of the oak floors at cost, because they were half done, and half done is worse than not done, and because I paid him, and because I wanted them finished. The floors are beautiful. She was right about the floors, and I would rather say that out loud than carry it around. Doyle did not lose his license. I never made a complaint about Doyle. There was nothing to complain about, because Doyle had never listed anything, and a plan is not a crime, and I have no interest in punishing a man for arithmetic. What happened to Doyle is that his sister stopped answering his calls, which is a consequence he arranged for himself in a kitchen in June. The money Ross had been putting into my taxes and insurance was real, 26 months of it, $8,840, and Kendra was right that I had not noticed, and she was right that I should have. I wrote him a check for it in December. He did not want to take it. I told him it was not a gift, and it was not an apology, from either direction. It was a bill I had let somebody else pay, and I do not care to owe my children money. He took it. Then he sat at my kitchen table, in a house with the wall back up, and he cried, which I had seen my son do exactly twice before, once at his father's funeral, and once when he was 9, and put a hammer through a window. He said, "Why didn't you just tell me about the trust?" And that is the question, and he had earned a real answer. I told him I tried once, October of 2020, in this kitchen, and I got as far as saying there was something he should know about the house, and he said, "Mom, I don't want to talk about you dying." And I was so relieved that he said it that I never brought it up again. 7 years of Sunday dinners, and I let a sentence I did not want to say be his fault. So I made the exact mistake I spent a career watching other people make. I called it privacy. It was avoidance. And from the outside, there is no way to tell a locked drawer from an empty one. That is how my son ended up holding a drill against his own mother's front door and feeling reasonable about it. Here is where things stand. The house is still in the trust, and Ross is still the beneficiary. I did not change it. I thought about it hard for a week in November, and then did not do it, because anything you sign in a bad month is a bad document. What did change is that Ida added 1 page. If anybody, including my son, attempts to encumber, list, market, or renovate that property without the written authorization of the trustee, they take nothing from it. Ross has read that page. He read it in Ida's office in January, with me sitting beside him, which is how it should have been done in 2017. There are 2 keys to my house. One hangs on a hook by my bed. Dell Prather has the other, and Chief gets a biscuit every morning at 7:40 for the rest of his life. And there is one rule in my family now, and it took me 71 years and a knee replacement to be able to say it in one sentence. You may worry about me out loud. You may not make arrangements about me quietly. I still walk down to the recorder's office about once a month. I do not have any business there. Consuela asked me why once, when she came for coffee in the spring, and I told her the truth, which is that I like the sound of the drawers. A key is not ownership. It is permission, and permission has an owner. That is Frances's story. The part she still cannot get past is not the lock. It is that her son held the drill in the morning and worried about her leg in the afternoon, and meant both of them. If you have ever had your silence mistaken for permission, subscribe and stay with me. There is always a third act.